Good afternoon, and welcome to our TV show, featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at mythsandrealities.com. In episode 43, we have learned that Professor Justin McCarthy had discovered in the U.S. National Archives in 1990 a survey of Eastern Anatolia conducted in the summer of 1919 by two Americans, Captain Emory H. Niles and Mr. Arthur E. Sutherland, Jr. Their account is one of the first descriptions of this region by outside observers after World War I. However, the document was missing the author's field notes, which the authors emphasized should be read in conjunction with the report. Some 20 years after that, Niles and Sutherland's field notes have been found in the archives of the former American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, or ABCFM for short, in Istanbul, by another American historian, Brian Johnson. In episode 44, I covered Johnson's research work titled Americans Investigating Anatolia, the 1919 field notes of Emory Niles and Arthur Sutherland, published in peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Turkish Studies 34-2010. A PDF version is available on the internet. Between 14th of July and 12th of August 1919, Niles and Sutherland, employees of the aid organization called the American Committee for Relief in the Near East, or Near East Relief for short, traveled from Mardin to Trabzon by way of Bitlis, Van, and Erzurum, visiting 23 cities to determine their relief needs of the locals and how the Near East Relief could fulfill them. They were the first Americans to enter this area of Turkey after the war. Their report was mixed in among various papers related to Major General James Harbord's commission. A survey expedition sent by President Wilson to Anatolia and South Caucasus in September 1919 to investigate the feasibility of an American mandate over the region and establishment of an Armenian state that would include most of eastern Turkey. Harbord and some of U.S. military officers traveled from Mardin to Tiflis, but took a different route than Niles and Sutherland, which is why Harbord relied in his report on Niles and Sutherland observations of Bitlis and Van. Harbord, however, distorted their findings to make them better fit Harbord's report's tone and tenor. Since the American Protestant missionary activity in the late Ottoman Empire was quite extensive, discovery of Niles and Sutherland's field notes in the missionary archives in Istanbul should not come as a surprise. For the same reason, the inclusion of their report in the papers of the Harbord Commission is also understandable. The ABCFM, a Protestant mission agency founded in 1810 to spread Protestant teachings worldwide, first appeared in Anatolia in 1820. Finding Muslims inaccessible, the missionaries turned to Christians of the Eastern churches. By the 1850s, the ABCFM had already built an extensive network of schools and hospitals. The outbreak of the World War I interrupted missionary activities abruptly, although the U.S. did not enter the First World War for almost 3 years. What is worse was the fact that the Armenians, in whom the missionaries invested most, deserted from the Ottoman army, while the country was fighting for its survival under multiple foreign attacks, and joined the invading enemy armies of the Tsarist Russia. In addition, the Armenian turncoats waged massive armed rebellions in eastern Anatolia, tying up Ottoman soldiers desperately needed at many fronts. Page 34 of the Macmillan Dictionary of First World War, written by Pope and Wheel, published in London in 1997, describes this situation as follows, I quote, Armenian nationalists invaded eastern Anatolia in December and slaughtered an estimated 120,000 non-Armenians, while the Turkish army was preoccupied with mobilization and the Caucasian Front offensive towards Sarıkamış, unquote. Armenian insurgents killed another 80,000 Muslims during the Van Rebellion in April-May of 1915. Ethnically cleansing the entire area of its Muslims. The two numbers alone add up to 200,000 Muslims dead, representing about 2% of the Ottoman Muslims. What would America do if a domestic insurgent group took up arms against America and killed 2% of Americans, which would be about 6.6 billion citizens? What? Would America stop at temporarily resettling the insurgents' logistic base like the Ottomans did in 1915? Or would a Waco, Texas, or even Nagasaki on the table? Consider that the US waged a global war because 3,000 Americans were killed on 9/11, not 6.6 million. And the US spent $5.8 trillion, according to researchers at Brown University, on the war in Afghanistan and other conflicts stemming from 9/11, killing more than 1 million Muslims, mostly non-combatant civilians. Food for thought. Johnson states that the measures taken by the Ottoman government in the spring of 1915 to expel the rebellious Armenians from the war zones, intercommunal fighting, and banditry led to the flight or death of many Armenian inhabitants. The American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief, established by missionaries and some American philanthropists to assist Armenians, painted in its pro-Christian and pro-Armenian reports the entire Muslim populace as marginal, misguided, and tyrannical. The US politicians and media accepted all such venomous reports uncritically, as the embellished stories suited the prevailing bias and popular perceptions. Prejudice fueled perceptions, and perceptions ignited prejudice. Meanwhile, Niles and Sutherland report was shunned, buried uncaringly in other reports, hid from the public eye, and forgotten. During World War I, American missionaries were principal informants about events in Anatolia, and their bigoted accounts remain a prime source for the history of this era even today, and still accepted at face value uncritically. They never disclosed that during the 6 centuries of Ottoman reign, the Christian subjects of the Ottoman Empire had enjoyed a degree of religious freedom that was not accorded to the Muslims and Jews of Europe, or even some Christian sects. The missionaries ignored the many seditious and violent activities of Armenian Revolutionary Federation and other Armenian groups, which caused the Ottoman government to lose trust in Armenians. The missionaries failed to point out that many of the Armenians had lived in a theater of war, betrayed their own government, or that Muslim Turks were also suffering greatly due to the same wartime conditions. Johnson notes that Barton conducted a survey expedition earlier the same year, from March to May 1919, starting in Istanbul, traveling via eastern Turkey to Aleppo and back. In a letter describing this trip to Admiral Bristol, senior U.S. naval commander in Turkey, Barton urged for U.S. military occupation of all of Anatolia. 2 months before Barton's expedition, Niles and Sutherland visited almost the same area through a different route. They traveled by train, horse, carriage, and automobile as the local conditions allowed. The mission ended at the Black Sea port of Trabzon. They returned to Istanbul mid-August, completed their term of duty, and left Turkey within a few days. Their field notes and report were submitted to the administrators of the Near East Relief in Turkey. This explains how the notes emerged from the American Board Archives in Istanbul, as William Peet, ABC-FM business agent and treasurer, was also a member of the Near East Relief. This also suggests how their report might have found its way into the papers of the Harbord Commission. President Wilson had appointed Major General James G. Harbord of the U.S. Army to lead an expedition to Anatolia and Transcaucasia to investigate the feasibility of an American mandate in the region. This task was delegated to President Wilson by the Paris Peace Conference, then in progress, and urged on by persistent lobbyists like James Barton and pro-Armenian lobby. After arriving at Istanbul on September 2, 1919, Harbord met with missionaries, and Barton, who was preparing to return to the U.S., helped Harbord plan the itinerary for Harbord's mission. That is when Harbord probably received a copy of the Niles and Sutherland report to familiarize Harbord with the area. Niles and Sutherland recorded human and material losses, interviewed local officials and inhabitants. They estimated the need for food supplies and other support. They saw some devastated villages as well as half-destroyed ones with their few inhabitants in miserable condition. Roads and bridges were in poor condition. World War I had indeed taken a heavy toll on all the peoples of Eastern Anatolia, not just Armenians, as popularly believed in America. In May of 1915, Van was ethnically cleansed of its Muslims by Armenians and turned over to the invading Russian army. Russians and Armenians occupied Van along with much of Eastern Anatolia until 1917, when the revolution started in Russia and the Russian army left, leaving Armenian forces in place. That is when Armenian atrocities victimizing defenseless Muslims peaked and lasted from 1917 to 1918. The Ottomans launched a counteroffensive in early 1918. No match for the disciplined Turkish army, the Armenians escaped eastward towards the Caucasus, while at the same time, the Muslims of the Caucasus moved westward into the Ottoman territory. It is interesting to note that we always hear much about Armenian suffering, but nothing about Muslim suffering, both of which happened at the same time, in the same geography, and due to the same wartime conditions. Half the story was left out. Niles and Sutherland report was a breath of fresh air in the orthodox historiography of the alleged Armenian genocide. Here is what they said, quoting Johnson. According to the estimates of Niles and Sutherland, no Armenians remained in Bitlis from a pre-war population of 10,000, while 4,000 Muslims were left from the 30,000 who inhabited the town prior to 1914. They concluded that about 1/7 of the normal populace was left in Bitlis in the summer of 1919, the rest having been killed or fled. They also estimated that about 90% of the town had been destroyed. The Muslim quarter was in total ruin, with an estimated 6,500 homes lost. Mosques, shops, public buildings, and bridges had also been wrecked. In the Armenian area, though, about 500 dwellings out of 1,500 had been destroyed. The same general conditions were evident throughout the region, especially in territory that had been under Russian and Armenian control. In the province of Van, Niles and Sutherland estimated that 150,000 Muslims and 700 Armenians remained from pre-war population of 301,000 and 68,000 respectively. Proportionally, the majority Muslim community had suffered greater loss, unquote. Lesser damage observed in Armenian villages compelled Niles and Sutherland to reassess the frequent accounts of Armenian atrocities victimizing Muslims. They understandably doubted those stories at first, which contradicted the popular black and white perception in the American media, depicting all Armenians as innocent victims and all Turks as brutal victimizers. They heard shocking stories where the Armenians were accused of having committed murder, rape, arson, torture, and other horrible atrocities of every description upon the Muslim population. Niles and Sutherland included in their final report how their observations in the field supported these accounts of unspeakable Armenian brutality and crimes, persecuted innocent Muslims. The reports of the Muslim refugees from the Armenian Republic were also heart-wrenching. Niles and Sutherland sent a telegram on 31st of July 1919 to Major Arnold in Istanbul and the ABC-FM missionary Ernest Yarrow in Tiflis, but neither commenced an inquiry. Near East Relief took no steps to alleviate the looming famine in the Muslim towns and villages of Erzurum because, quote, there were practically no Christians there, unquote. Niles and Sutherland data exposes some censored thoughts and thinly veiled facts. One, that the devastation of Eastern Anatolia was thorough and visible everywhere, and Armenians were responsible for much of it. Two, that the Muslim villages and city quarters were destroyed more completely than the Armenian ones. Three, that the Armenians were not innocent angels as believed because they murdered mainly civilian, non-combatant Muslim men, women, and children. Four, that the missionaries grossly misrepresented the facts on the ground to the US and international media and politicians purely for religious reasons. Five, that suffering was widespread across all populations, Christian and Muslim, Armenian and Turk alike. Six, that continuing brutality in the South Caucasus had deeply traumatized the Muslims of Anatolia and that Armenian repatriation there was unrealistic. When the Near East Relief had instructed Niles and Sutherland to determine relief needs in Eastern Turkey, the latter achieved this task with altruistic concern, reporting the needs of the people regardless of their ethnic and religious identification. Niles and Sutherland's findings apparently did not concur with the Near East Relief's perceptions and perspectives. The latter raised in 1915 and 1916 millions of dollars among the Americans by relentlessly spreading an anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim, and pro-Armenian propaganda, replete with concocted stories and embellished casualty numbers. Missionary accounts and the US press heavily publicized as stereotypical, shaping the American public opinion about events in Anatolia before, during, and after the World War I. Niles and Sutherland's findings contradicted this outlook. Near East Relief and ABC-FM leaders and supporters wanted an Armenian resettlement in Turkey leading to an independent state in the East. Niles and Sutherland's observations cast serious doubt on this plan. American mandate for Armenia was being debated intensely in the US at the time, which may be why the Near East Relief did not share Niles and Sutherland's report that questioned its feasibility. Harvard's government-sponsored expedition had been organized largely because of lobbying by James Barton and other supporters of a protectorate. Harvard consulted members of the Near East Relief and the ABC-FM for advice and guidance. Justin McCarthy's discovery of the Niles and Sutherland report in the papers of Harvard Commission confirms that Near East Relief shared it with Harvard during this phase. Predictably, In his written conclusions, composed in the October of 1919 and submitted to the U.S. Secretary of State on November 14, 1919, Harvard recommended a mandate over the region by a single great power, perhaps the U.S. Harvard also referred to Niles and Sutherland's investigation of Bitlis and Van, a territory that had been inaccessible to Harvard. He also affirmed that their findings in these areas substantiated Harvard's own observations in neighboring territories. This language is troubling because Niles and Sutherland might have hesitated to endorse an independent Armenia under the wings of a foreign power, whether it's US or not, due to deep traumatization the Muslims of Anatolia caused by those unspeakable Armenian atrocities during World War I. Niles and Sutherland's service contracts with the Near East Relief ended in August 1919, and they were released within days of returning to Istanbul. No public mention of their mission exists. Niles and Sutherland's field notes and report document an investigation by observers who valued impartiality. Niles and Sutherland's estimates of ethnic and/or religious populations and material damage, admittedly, are approximate, as they spent less than a day at each location on their route. They usually relied on local officials to provide current demographic statistics to compare them to pre-war figures that they already knew. Even so, Niles and Sutherland's data reveal the heretofore untold devastation of all of Eastern Anatolia's communities. The two men surveyed extensive territory, interviewed local informants, and compared and evaluated information from multiple sources. The details Niles and Sutherland uncovered should contribute to scholarly understanding of Anatolia during and after the First World War. Yet, the records of their mission are vital for much more. Their notes and report, unappreciated at the time, manifest an objective analysis. No work on the Turkish-Armenian conflict of World War I can be considered scholarly or thorough without studying Niles and Sutherland observations and data. Next week, I will complete this fascinating series on Niles and Sutherland by focusing on the aftermath of their report and finally their conclusions. Let the truth lead the way. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.